Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the second episode of Procurement Chronicles. Last week, we spoke with an individual from Bed Bath & Beyond. Today, we'll be speaking with Michael. Michael, would you like to introduce yourself and give some background before we jump into your story?
Absolutely. Nice to see you again, Ben. My name is Michael van Keulen, or some know me by MVK. I am the Chief Procurement Officer here at Coupa Software. Been here for a little over a year now. My first day was work from home when COVID hit. Previously, I was the head of procurement at Lululemon, where we transformed and digitized the procurement process and became a Coupa customer. Before Lululemon, I was at VF Corp for 9 years, also in procurement, first in Europe. Then I was given the opportunity to globally transform procurement at VF Corp, which we did, and also VF is a Coupa customer. So I've come home.
Good. Well, that's a good summary. And we're going to kind of go into that a little bit deeper and even go further back. But maybe just to start off, and I know one discussion we had when we had kind of a preparation discussion was around the topic of universities, and we'll get there, and I definitely want to have that be a common theme throughout, and we'll do a recap at the end on that topic. But childhood, where were you born? What, and any kind of relevant facets of your childhood that you feel kind of play into who you are as a professional?
Totally, yeah, happy to share. So I was born and raised, and I'm very proud to say this, born and raised in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, or in Holland. And Amsterdam, for what it's worth, I'm sure a lot of people have been to Amsterdam and a lot of listeners, but Amsterdam is a very multicultural, very dynamic city. So at a very young age, already was known and used to being surrounded by lots of different nationalities and cultures, and I had friends from every walks of life, every part of the world. So that came back to me and still comes back to me today, even in the way I'd like to conduct business. But that's really where I was born. We then moved out of there to a city close to Amsterdam called Almere. Spent probably 25 years there. Went all through university, and always been a really big soccer fan, or football. I can't hide it, right? I love soccer, or football as we call it. And what I learned there was at a very young age that, teamwork is ultimately, what's going to drive better business outcomes, or in this case, better soccer outcomes. It's a team sport. I was the captain of the team for the most part. And so also, at a young age, had to learn how it feels like to be a leader, to set the example. So a lot of that comes back to me at a later age as well. But, realized that soccer wasn't my thing, to actually turn into a profession. I think we all come to that conclusion, or most of us. And then finished my university in Amsterdam and started my professional career at Arthur Andersen for a couple of years in consulting. So that's really like the very early stage to, early adulthood.
So, and I figured out I wasn't going to be athletic about 2 weeks into to sports. I was not a very coordinated individual. So, one thing we talked about is Dutch entrepreneurs, because I think, the idea of this podcast will have a pretty global, listener base. This is something you had discussed earlier. What do you think is unique about Dutch entrepreneurs, and how did that kind of shape you as a professional?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, it's part of our founding, right? The Netherlands is a very, very small country. We've got 16 and maybe now 20, but, around about that 16 to 20 million people. So it's a small country, but has, some of the biggest companies, and has had, always that entrepreneurship and think outside of your own four walls and think outside of your own borders and really, get out there in the world. And that has just been part of our DNA. So if I think and reflect that back on myself, I think I had that at a young age. My dad was a small entrepreneur in Holland, and they had his own cab and did that. But at a very young age, I saw entrepreneurship and really driving outside of your own comfort zone almost. And that's what the Dutch have done always, right? If you go back to the 1600s. You go back to, the early days in the United States with, New Amsterdam as being New York now, and how we always have been able to drive business outside of our own four walls, being our own country. That has always been really, really strong for the Dutch. It goes back to history, and so it's been part of our DNA. And then I think that that's what you often hear and see. I mean, there's Dutch companies and people everywhere in the world because we are known to be very much, entrepreneurs and really, are curious. We always want to stretch the bar and raise the bar and go way beyond the level of comfort. And I think that's part of our DNA.
As someone who grew up and lived this whole life in the United States, that was I really like that context too, because it makes a ton of sense as you explain it that Dutch entrepreneurs, similar to any entrepreneur, are the type of people who are able to kind of envision something that doesn't exist yet, right? Put yourself out of your comfort zone to try to create that thing with some type of a faith that you're going to be able to make that thing that doesn't exist actually exist. So. Definitely not something I'd thought about before. But so you go to college in Amsterdam, and we're going to talk about kind of the college experience. I think probably a larger portion of the listener base will be in the U.S., but again, we'll be international. What was college like, and how did it not tie into the procurement world? And
Yeah, I actually went in there with the plan to get out and go into the real world ASAP. So I do believe in education, so please don't misunderstand. But I really wanted to go into, I was ready to go into the corporate world. I really wanted to experience that. So I really went in there with the intent to get out as quickly as I could, of course with a degree, because I do believe that that's important, especially, I graduated when I was 21. Very, very young age, but I really went into to go into the real world. I also, during my study, I did company economics and banking and insurance. I very quickly realized what I didn't want to do as part of my study. I already knew I never wanted to be in banking. I never wanted to be in insurance. And I very, very intentionally started at Arthur Andersen because I didn't really know, where do I want to go? Do I want to be in finance? Do I want to maybe be more in IT or in market? I didn't really know. I finished the degree, and then I realized that what I really like to do is I did like the consulting element. I did like the element of driving meaningful change. I liked finance, so I kind of started to dig deeper into the finance part of my education. And for the first, 10, 15 years of my career, I heavily focused on finance. I did a lot of finance transformation. I've done a lot of setting up shared service centers for finance. I was the controller for a long time at Foot Locker. And so really it was more in finance. And because there's no procurement school, and I know we're going to talk about that, but I didn't really realize that what I actually really wanted to do was procurement and supply chain, because that actually brings a lot of different skill sets together, and I know we're going to talk about that. But at the earlier part of my career, I certainly realized that I do like, logic. I like to use data. I'd like to drive business outcomes. But I also knew that I always wanted to be at a place where I could drive real, meaningful change. I really noticed that that's what really drives me is to be part of something that is going to it's kind of that entrepreneur, as we just like to do something that is really going to take us to the next level.
Yeah, it takes you to a different place than where you're at. And I think while we're talking about the university experience, procurement, was that even something that you felt like you bumped into? I mean, was there even kind of a framework for it within? And I imagine did you graduate from a business school within that university? So within a business school, not really any exposure to it in that context.
No, sorry. Yeah. So no, we had, accounting. I had accounting school. I had commercial economics. I had law, corporate law. Of course, some language skills were there, English, and I had some French as well. And but none of that was related to supply chain or procurement or negotiation or the art of negotiation or how to drive better outcomes using data. None of that existed at that time. It was mostly driven around, marketing and some HR and legal and finance and IT. I mean, the traditional silos, if you will, right? But none of that related to procurement or supply chain. None of it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and that's been a pretty recurring theme with most of the people I've had kind of initial discussions with at this point.
Yep.
So you started Arthur Andersen. You enjoy the consulting aspect of it, enjoy the ability to actually drive change, to make meaningful adjustments. It's kind of just going through after being at Arthur Andersen. You're at Sterling Commerce, and I think you'd mentioned during our discussion about a specific manager that you felt like had a pretty significant impact
Yeah.
on. Would you want to expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. I actually had two that I'm still in touch with today. So I had my direct manager, Jan Pieter de Hoog. He's still there at IBM now because Sterling got bought a few times and spun off and whatever. But he gave me a lot of trust. He trusted me a lot, and he gave me a lot of responsibility at a very young age. I traveled a lot and really was given quite a lot of responsibilities in my mid-20s that I was like, wow, am I ready? And he really drove me. And I actually met him during my consulting days at GE. I did a consulting project there. And then he moved to Sterling. He brought me back in there as a consultant, and ultimately, I joined them on their payroll. But he gave me a lot of trust. So he's been really important for me at the beginning part of my career. And at Sterling, we had a chief financial officer, Tom Lowe, who's now at AT&T. And he became the CFO after an acquisition. Sterling got bought by AT&T or SBC at the time. And he once said to me, you will make more money between your 40th and your 50th than your 20th and your 40th. And when he said that to me, I was, I think, 26 or 27. And when he said that to me, I was like, I'm not really sure what that means.
Yeah.
But when I reflected back a little later in my career, a couple of years after, honestly, and I even told him when I met him not so long ago, and I said to him, I said, now I started realizing what it means. And what it means is, when you build your career, it is really important, and I honestly have never done that, it is important that you make the right decisions based upon responsibilities, where the company is going. Is it going to get you to, the next level of uncomfortableness, if you will? Like, is it going to stretch you? Do you think you're ready? Probably not. Well, the question is, are you ever? And so, dive in, feel like you're challenging yourself rather than chasing a paycheck. Like, of course, money is important. We all need to make a living. But is it really important I'm going to make 10, 20, 30% more salary somewhere and I'm going to be miserable? Or I'm not going to learn, or I'm not going to develop and grow, or I'm not going to do things that I don't know how to do yet, and in the job I have the opportunity to learn them, and now I just become more valuable. And so I've built my career based more on not on comfort level or compensation or title or things like that. I've more looked at what's my scope, what's my remit, what is my task, what am I here to do? Is it going to be easy? If the answer is no, I'm more interested, right? So when I say easy, it's not like, oh, it's easy, is it going to be a challenge? And literally, I've made those decisions during my career where some people might look at it and go like, wow, why on earth would you do that? But then we'll talk about some of that for sure. But, really, like, how do you take yourself to the next level? And I've always been doing that. And even today at Coupa, that's what I constantly try to do.
Yeah, two things stick out to me. I think in those kind of first two managers, one, the concept that early manager that had trust in you. I think with your background, coming from a very entrepreneurial mindset, coming out of college with that, get in college, get out and start building something. It's I think a lesson to be learned by managers and leaders is don't beat that out of people.
No.
Don't beat out that excitement, because I think there's a lot of people who do come out of college, come out of high school, wherever they're at, right? And they've got that view, and then they have the wrong manager, they have the wrong type of a leader, and they lose it, right? They stop kind of believing that they can drive change. They stop caring about being involved and energetic. Yeah. This individual allowed you to kind of be you, and took advantage of it, really, right? I mean, said, hey, I'm going to use you in a way. I'm going to let you have autonomy. I'm going to let you do what you need to be to be successful, and that allows you to continue to kind of grow, I think. So that's one takeout. And the other one is just what you're saying, take a long-term view on your career, right? I mean, that there's decisions you're making, and you referenced, decisions in the short term as opposed to the long term, and making sure you're in the right place, make sure you're developing the right skills. That really, to me, is a long-term view instead of, focusing on the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
While that's relevant, look 10, 20 years down the road, especially early on in your career.
Yeah, it's 100% right. Building a career is not a sprint; it's a marathon. And I know that sounds really like, oh yeah, okay, well that's pretty basic, but really keep that in the back of your mind, right? I mean, and then the second thing is build your network. Build your network and build your own brand. Like I realized that, what's important is that people also know who I am and not just who I work for. And those were two things that I kind of picked up on at some point in your career. You're starting to realize, like, look, it's not like, it's also important people realize who I am and what I bring to the table, and that it's not just I have a certain role or a certain level or a certain position within the company and people within the company know. Right? Because at some point, what you own is, I own building my own network, and I own my own name, my own brand, my personal brand. I own that, right? And of course, LinkedIn is a phenomenal platform for that. It's really easy to building your network and ecosystem. That's how we got together as well. And yeah, I mean, that opens up opportunities. I mean, the opportunities that I've been given as a result of just using LinkedIn in a fairly smart and way, but you own those two things.
Yeah, and I think we fast forwarded. Big believer in that too. We fast forwarded 5 to 10 years through the pandemic too. I mean, I think the need to be able to have a personal brand, the need to be a thought leader, the need to be out there connected, networking in beyond not just your own company but your own regional area. Your own the people you spend time with at lunches or whatever else is critical. I mean, especially now, right? I mean, I went to a couple conferences the last 2 weeks, and they had about a third of the attendance. And I think some of that is going to return as things get a little bit more towards normal whenever that does happen. But I think some of it's a long-term shift where there are people who are engaging in the same ways they used to in person, but in a digital manner. And so I just can't reinforce as much what you're saying there, that it's even more important in 2021 than it was in 2019, and it was pretty damn important in 2019. So yeah, okay, great. I've got notes here. Focusing on long term. One thing you noted, it was important to have a manager with your best interest in mind. Why? I mean, obviously it's a little bit self-explanatory, but how is that?
Yeah, look, and this is maybe goes into a little bit of my own management style or what I think is important. I'm a big believer in giving people exposure. That's where it starts, right? Give people exposure. So I was given that opportunity in my career, by the managers that I gravitated to the most, and I haven't always had managers that I loved, right? I mean, I've also had managers where I'm like, that maybe. He didn't have my best interest at heart, right? And it happened, and that's okay. But at least I try to give my team exposure, and what I mean with that is they should feel comfortable to go to my leader, to who supports me, Todd Ford, and go to him directly, and don't make them feel like they have to, like it's some kind of hierarchical, like nonsense of like he has to, come to me first, and but also to other leaders in our company. I want my team to feel unconstrained, no barriers, very open, but also give them exposure. That's important for their own career development. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to trust them. I want my team to mess it up. That's okay. As we say at Coupa, fail fast and move on. It's okay to make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. I know I'm not, and that's okay. But it's also okay to create that environment to your team. So that's really important. But then as you build teams, diversity is really important. And I can't stress enough how important it is for us in procurement to think about diversity in our teams. That's not just gender. That's not just ethnicity. It's not where you're from in the world. Yes, that matters. But what also matters is education, background, like what traits do they bring to the table? That is maybe even more important than gender and ethnicity. They matter. I'm not trying to downplay that, but bring somebody with construction experience into procurement. Bring an engineer. Bring somebody from the help desk. I did that at Lululemon, and I've said this before on other conversations I've had, but, bring somebody from the help desk. So diversity becomes important. When you have those things, people start to learn from each other and open up to each other. And so that's really my philosophy in how you want to be managed, but also how I want to manage. I think those are probably the three big things for me.
I like that diversity of thought, right? I mean, I think
Absolutely.
you're saying, then that can be tied to gender or any other diversity metric, but the idea is you want people to think differently, to challenge each other. You don't want to end up in a spot, especially in procurement, where you've just got
And
everyone's going down the same road.
Yeah, and I think that is what kept procurement from advancing over the past 10 years. Diversity. We've been talking to ourselves for way too long, and often it was, at these conferences. I mean, you've been there, Ben. Very often it's very male dominated, even still today, and often it's very white, right? Whether we like it, we're both here, two white dudes saying this to each other. But you know what I mean? Like, we need more diversity in procurement. We need more women in procurement, and we're seeing some phenomenal procurement leaders, female procurement leaders, and I can actually call quite a few of them my friends. They bring just a completely different skill set to the table. And so I'll stop because I can talk about diversity for hours. That's what we really need in procurement, and that's what's going to take us to the next level as a profession.
Well, I think it also ties into the general theme of this discussion too, right? That procurement needs to do a better job at selling itself.
Yeah.
At the university level, to students, so they understand what's there, and that's in the U.S., that's around the world. It needs to do a better job at selling itself to certain groups, whether it's ethnicity or gender, because it hasn't. I mean, if you look at you can make the assumption it hasn't, just based on the fact that, like you said, it's got a very non-diverse population at these conferences.
Yep. Procurement is one of the least diverse professions. I believe there was a McKinsey study not so long ago that actually said we're on number 13 of functional areas when it comes to diversity in our profession. So, that just shows you that there's a lot of work to be done. And guess what? Diversity is at the top of the agenda of every single leader, every executive, shareholders. They all talk about ESG and diversity, right? So here we are trying to move diversity agendas for our company. We often think about it from a supplier diversity perspective.
Exactly.
But our profession is not diverse, right? And so we need to move the bar there. And I think procurement owns that conversation. But it's because we have done a horrible job, and you just said it, Ben, of selling ourselves, both internally, but also externally. So when I walk down into a bar and somebody asks me, Michael, what do you do? And I say, I'm in procurement. 99 out of 100, they say, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Right? Nobody has to explain when you're in sales or marketing or IT or finance, or everybody gets that, right? So we should do that. Procurement. That's why one of the reasons why I joined Coupa is, honestly, we are the leader in business spend management. If I want to be part of elevating procurement, where better to do that than the company I currently work for? Yeah.
No, I think that's a great call out. So if kind of moving on to the next stage. So really at this point, I mean, you don't really hear much about procurement in college. You move into finance roles, just kind of where can I drive change? You move to Foot Locker, and I think this is kind of the first time when you had, at least from our discussion, correct me if I'm incorrect, where you've really kind of get to a pure procurement type of a project where someone raises an e-sourcing tool, and that's kind of where you kind of everything kind of combines, and it's like
that's where my logic finance brain, debit and credit, came together with the supply chain brain, and it all started to click. I vividly remember we were implementing e-sourcing in the US. My manager came to me, the CFO at the time, and said, hey, is anybody interested in deploying this for Europe? And I was like, hey, I don't really know what e-sourcing really means, but it sounds interesting. It's new. I don't really know what this is. I'll raise my hand and I'll take it on. It wasn't like I was asking for more work, but I knew that this was going to result in more work. And I said, I'll take it. And so we implemented e-sourcing with IASTA at the time, and one of the early e-sourcing platforms at the time that Free Markets and Ariba and a few others were in that space, and implemented that. And I mean, we drove so much value. It was incredible. Like, we saved 30-40% every single category. We did armored car, utilities, shopping bags, office supply. We did every single category you can think of. And it was very new, right? A lot of companies that we were inviting to these auctions and sourcing events, they were like, what is this even? Why can't we not just come to your office and have a conversation? We said, no, here's the RFP. Here's the RFP. Submit your bids, and we'll have a conversation. And we drove so much value. And that's when I got really excited about procurement and sourcing and fact-based decision-making and analytics. And that's probably where my procurement passion comes from, for sure.
Great. Yeah, and then as your story kind of unfolds at that point, I mean, you move from Foot Locker to VF Corporation, well, actually Foot Locker to Levi Strauss to VF Corporation. And at VF, you've kind of worked your way up into a director position in the global realm. Any kind of color or context?
Totally. I started in finance. I mean, the other thing I believe in is control your own destiny. I legitimately believe in that. Like, nobody is going to just present something to you on a silver platter and say, hey, how about this opportunity, right? So when I joined VF, I started in finance. And of course, with my sourcing experience and procurement experience from my Foot Locker days, the first thing I did, or after a year or so when I was in finance and etc., is I started looking at shopping bags. And we had all these brands. So VF is a house of brands of North Face and Vans and Timberland got bought later on. But all these brands, and they all have shopping bags in their stores. And I very quickly ran an analysis, and I discovered that we had sometimes the same supplier, the same spec, and we were paying different prices, because they were different brands, right? And those brands didn't talk to each other. And so I quickly made an analysis, went to the CFO, and I said, hey, do you realize we can take out around about $1.5 million if we were just to consolidate our volume to one supplier, multiple factories, right? We still want to de-risk our supply chain, but we go under one supplier and negotiate this and bring economy of scale, we can take out $1.5 million. And he's like, I never really thought about that. I said, he's like, what else can we do? I said, well, let's talk about office supplies. We have 4 different suppliers. Like, why don't we? So long story short, I actually created my own job at VF in Europe, because I said, hey, why don't you do this procurement thing? It sounds exciting. Do you want to? I said, sure. And so I did set up the procurement function in Europe. That created some attention, of course. We took out 10 million euros in a very short period of time. And then I created some attention. And then I had Tom Glazer, who asked me once, who was the head of the supply chain. It's a true story. Yeah? He asked me, hey, Michael, heard some good things, and you've been doing this great work and drove value and whatever. Where do you see yourself going? And I said to him, I think I'm going to leave. And he looked at me, he's like, why would you say that? And I said, well, I set up the function. I've done this for 3 years. And he's like, give me a few weeks. And he came back, and then he came back to me a few weeks later and said, how would you like to lead a global transformation for procurement at VF?
Oh, wow.
So my point here is not so much the story. It's more, sometimes you want to be bold in your career, and sometimes that creates scars, and I believe scars create character, so that's all fine. But it actually created a completely new opportunity for me.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, you communicated what you needed. You said I'm probably gonna have to go out.
I love VF. And today, I love VF. It's a great company. I've had a great run there, and it's given me great opportunity. But it's a partnership, right? And I said, look, I think I'm at the end of my runway here, and I think I'm ready for more, but I'm not really sure where that comes from. And Tom Glazer is another one that's been super critical in my career, and so has Sandra Harris been. I mean, if we're doing name calling here, but they've been super critical in building my career and giving me the trust and the confidence and you need champions, but you also need to control your own destiny.
Yeah, I think that's big. I mean, the fact that you're just willing to communicate what hey, this is what I envision for my career, the next step. I don't currently view that where I'm at. And then you had someone that, was able to go back and wanted to make it possible for you and created really that same opportunity you were looking for elsewhere within your company.
Yeah.
As a leader, I think that's also, from his perspective, having the type of environment and relationship with you where you felt comfortable telling him that probably saved him, having you leave earlier, right? Because You would have, if you didn't have a comfortable relationship with him, you just would have left to go find it elsewhere.
Yeah,
But you
and
gave him an opportunity, and I think that
yeah,
speaks to kind of the relationship you had.
yeah, totally. But it also, I want that relationship for people that are part of my team.
Yes.
And you can ask the people on my team. I'm like, I'm heavily invested in your career. I'm heavily invested in your development. If you believe you're not getting that here anymore, tell me. We can talk
Yep.
about it. I'm not going to fire you, right? I want that, right? I want people
Yeah.
to come to me and say, "Hey, Michael, I think I'm at the end of my journey here," because then I can be your reference. Why would
Yeah.
I? The leaders that are not that don't think like that should not be leaders, in my opinion.
Agreed.
That's exactly what I should do. I should have people on my team today at Coupa, when they're at the end of their runway, come to me so that we can together figure out what your next step is. And I can be your
Yeah.
reference and I can vouch for you. Like, why should we not be able to do that?
Yeah. And make sure that they're at the end of their runway and there's not
And
another
that.
opportunity you
And
can
that.
create. I mean, but yeah, to your point, I mean, good leaders, lose the people they lead very often because they help them to develop into individuals who have so much value that it becomes that there are other opportunities come up. That's not a bad thing. I think that's I
Great.
think that's what you should aspire to. That
Great.
people are leaving the nest sometimes.
I want people to ultimately, at some point, leave my team to go lead procurement somewhere else. That's awesome.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, nothing gives me greater satisfaction than that.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot in. You mentioned, you're a big football or soccer fan, depending where you live. You see that in sports, right? I mean, the coaching trees. The best coaches end up having coaching trees where there's head coaches of other teams, clubs, whatever the relevant organization is that were assistant coaches under them. Offensive, defensive, and
Yep.
I mean that speaks to the best coaches in
Yeah.
any sport.
Yeah, you shouldn't be afraid. Yeah, don't be afraid.
Yeah.
As a leader, don't be afraid. I mean, the best leaders hire a bunch of super smart people and let them actually make all the decisions. That's.
Yeah.
I mean, you can ask all the great entrepreneurs and leaders in the world what they've done, and one of the things. I mean, of course, they had a great idea or they had something, right? They recognized, but then they built a great team,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
all great leaders, whether it's Steve Jobs or others, Jack Welch. I mean, they've all exactly done that, and they recognize that is ultimately the recipe for success, long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So, kind of, rolling forward into, you spent 5 years at Lululemon, and then kind of rolling into your current role, and maybe spend some time talking about what your current role is. You've kind of made some references into what attracted you there, but I doubt that's all inclusive. So, let's talk about kind of that Lululemon period, and then what are you doing now?
Yeah.
Why are you doing it? What's
Yeah.
exciting to you?
Yeah, so real quick, at Lulu, I was given that opportunity. I recognized that the brand had a lot of potential. There was no reason for me to leave VF, but was given that opportunity to lead a procurement function versus at VF, I wasn't the leader. And so, I felt it was the right time. Plus, it's Vancouver, which is consistently in the top 5 of best cities in the world. So I felt like
Good
that.
place.
My
Good
wife.
city.
I didn't have to convince my wife to move after 2 years in Greensboro, North Carolina. But we did move. I've now 3 children. 2 at the time we moved. And was given the opportunity to build a procurement function. There was no procurement. It was very tactical, very operational in nature. And to really start moving that up to the level 2, level 3 procurement and, more category management and strategic sourcing and fact-based decision making and building relationships with suppliers. And I can give you tons of examples there if you want. But we really moved the needle at Lulu, implemented Coupa. And then, at some point that opportunity comes in your career to think about what's next. Kind of knew I was at the end of my runway at Lulu, like you've set it all up and you want to do something different. And that's when, the opportunity came to join Coupa. And I had a few options, right? I mean, that just happens. And I figured it was the right time. Yeah, Coupa has been, I've been a really big fan of the company, the platform, of course, as a 2-time buyer. And really believe in the philosophy and the culture, and I noticed that culture to me is extremely important. And so, yeah, I subscribed to putting the next step in my career into Coupa. And I always believe that that's a 3 to 5 year journey, and then we'll see. As you pivot and as the company continues to mature and grow. Was really excited to be given this opportunity. And if you look at Coupa, what we do today is I do 3 things. The first one is I get to support internal procurement. no different than you do at any other company. But the other two things are probably more exciting, to be frank. The first one is, of course, our product, and talk to Donna Wilczek and Raja and her teams around what's the next iteration of our digital platform, our business spend management platform, where are we going, and how can I help and provide maybe some ideas and be helpful there. And it's just incredible what this company has built over the past 10 plus years. It's incredible. So play a role in that. I figured that'd be really exciting to kind of help build a car. Build your own car.
Yeah.
And how I looked at it. So that was exciting.
On the other side, you've been on the other side of the implementation.
Yeah, so it's super exciting and see the secret sauce of this company, which is really interesting. And then the other thing I do is I get to talk to a lot of prospects and peers and customers and just talk about business spend management. I don't need to sell Coupa. I'm not in sales, right? I'm a practitioner. But I do talk to all these customers and all these prospects about digitization, driving procurement transformation. And that's what I really was after. To be honest, like the biggest reason is I believe in procurement. I believe in the power of procurement. I believe procurement, is the best functional area in any company. I believe the CPO is the CEO of the future. And I'm extremely passionate about it. And I felt like I could bring those three things together, and where better to do that than, at the industry leader, if you ask the 20 plus analysts out there in the market, which is Coupa, and that was the only sales pitch I did for Coupa in this whole conversation, I hope. But
that's good. That's good. Well, no,
I mean, it just brought it all together, and it was such a no-brainer. It was a no-brainer to do this, and I'm extremely. I consider it a privilege and an honor, to be honest, to be the CPO at Coupa.
Well, it makes a ton of sense based on just the discussion we've had so far. You want to be able to connect and network with people, and you want to be able to drive change. And I think essentially one of those three roles you're talking about is an evangelist for procurement, right? I mean, something you're passionate about, something you have energy for. You get the opportunity to be able to network more so than you would in another procurement role outside your organization, and again, evangelize procurement. So coming back to evangelizing procurement, and kind of hitting that, I think the big point we wanted to expand on here is just the concept of selling procurement. We've talked about it a couple times. What are you currently doing to sell procurement? What are some things you'd like to see as an industry happen over the next 3 to 5 years? You mentioned procurement CPOs being the CEOs of the future, right? I mean, a lot of that's going to be built on what the perception of procurement is, right, within organizations.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue. It's perception, right? If you are, the first thing I always say to practitioners who ask me, hey, Michael, where do I get started, right? Where do I get started? I would say, stop talking about cost savings. Talk about value. You want to talk about value. How do I optimize and maximize the value of every dollar that leaves your company? So if I'm in an elevator with the CEO, I would say, have your elevator pitch ready, right? Yeah. Literally, you're stepping in the elevator on the 25th floor, you go all the way down, you got 20 seconds. The CEO may or may not know you.
Yeah.
And he or she will ask, hey, who are you? And then you're like, hey, I am XYZ, and I am the chief procurement. I am the leader in procurement, whatever the title is. It doesn't matter. Yeah. They're like, oh, what does that really mean? Well, what it really means is I help you extract more value out of every dollar spent, and I help you accelerate your strategic objectives. Well, done. Now, the elevator is down, and is the CEO now getting out of the elevator on her way or his way to some meeting and say, hey, I'm actually going to be 5 minutes late because you just triggered my interest?
Yes.
I think I would have at that point, oh, what does that mean? You can accelerate my strategic objectives. Yeah. Well, guess what? So that's what I would encourage to see, a leader in procurement to do, or anybody in procurement. Now you have the ear, and now you need to say, okay, well, let me back that up, right? Let me back that up with some facts. So ESG, talk about ESG, right? There's no cost savings in ESG, but ESG is at the top of the agenda of every single company and every single executive. Why? Because their shareholders are asking for it. ESG, diversity and inclusion, risk management and mitigation, business continuity, cybersecurity, reputational risk. I mean, none of these that I just said have anything to do with cost savings.
Yeah.
Right? So cost saving is an element, driving efficiency, optimizing your cash flow, optimizing your working capital, reducing your reliance on certain suppliers because that might actually increase risk. You know, like, I mean, none of that is cost reduction. And so the point is now, and if you can have those kinds of conversations, now you become a strategic initiative very quickly. They're like, oh, wow, you can do all of that for me? Yes, absolutely. And that's why procurement went through this transformative journey over the past 18 months, because that's exactly what happened in March of last year.
Yeah.
Every single practitioner I talk to today is talking about all these things that I just described, right?
Yeah.
And it's always people, process, technology. Now we talk about the maturity levels of procurement and what kind of trades do we need in procurement. And no longer do I need 30-year deep dive category experts in IT to lead IT procurement. I don't need those people. I don't need those people at Coupa, and I don't think you need those people in any procurement function. But what you do need is people that have the ability to drive change, empower people, emotional intelligence, natural curiosity, digital fluency. I mean, those things are more important, right? And so that's the people element, but that's how you get the attention of an executive. And I believe I can do procurement and I can convince an executive, and maybe there's a little the Dutch arrogance in me, but I think I could potentially sell procurement to any executive that has the right frame of mind.
No, I think that's critical. I think people in procurement probably underestimate, at least historically, how much you've just been viewed as a buyer. Right. I go and buy things. It's like, well, I go buy things too. On Saturday, I go out and I go to Costco, Sam's Club, and start picking things up. But what you just explained is fundamentally different than that, right? This is everything. I mean, really, what you just went through are all the kind of the key components of what a CEO has to care about, right?
And that's why I have just said to you that I believe the CPO is the CEO of the future. Because now add on top of that I know more, or not me personally, but if you execute procurement properly, I know more about the strategic objectives of every single functional area in the company. And I also know more about the ecosystem externally that we need to enable that, right? Which is suppliers. Nobody knows that better than procurement.
No,
I believe that, and so
I think it's a good content. I mean, I think it makes a ton of sense, and those are the things that if you're publicly traded, the board or the ownership care about too, right? I mean, those are the initiatives that. Yeah. But as a procurement group, how much is that being communicated? How much is that being?
Yeah, we can drive more innovation through the power of my supply chain than I can through my own four walls. If again you have the right strategic relationships, because that is the key. Right. The key is how do you build the relationship building. I think everybody in procurement talks about that these days. And it's not just internal relationships with your stakeholders, which is always a challenge, right? But it's also externally with your suppliers.
Yep.
Building the right relationships with your suppliers is fundamental for any procurement function. And now you can talk about innovation and 5-year planning. Where is the supplier going? Where am I going? I mean, we could do a whole session about that, but yeah.
No, that's great. That's great. And so I've been wanting to end these. You've given me too many takeaways, but I've been wanting to end these with kind of one last takeaway. I think we've probably got about a half dozen already, but any other key takeaway that we haven't covered already? Again, understanding my view. This is a podcast, so I mean most people will be listening to this in the future, especially because we're just starting things up right now. I'm imagining a lot of individuals, and we'll see if it actually happens this way or if it happens a different way. In college or early careers going into that, what's something that you wish you would have known earlier in your career, or you would want someone else to know if it was your own child, as they kind of walked into a career in procurement?
Yeah, so none of my kids right now, I mean, the 13 and 11-year-olds, they kind of understand what daddy does, are saying like, hey, I'd love to be in procurement. And then I sometimes go like, why not? It's so much fun. So that aside. I think that procurement is a career. you can have an extremely rewarding career in procurement. It's not I've tried everything else and I landed in procurement, which is quite often what happens, right? People are in marketing and like, I don't really like it. Let me give this procurement thing a shot. So a lot of people fall into the profession. So what I'd like to say to anybody listening, thinking about, hey, what do I love to do? Well, if you want to be, at the center of decision-making power, if you want to make a real meaningful change, not just in your company, but also in the world, right? Just think about what we can do when it comes to protecting and preserving the planet. Well, guess what? I'm actually at the heart of that. I can actually have the company build criteria that are better for our environment. Maybe are better for working environments in third world countries, modern slavery, and things of that nature. So my point is, I can make real meaningful change, both within the company that I work for, but also to the betterment of the world. It's a career. I believe it's very multidisciplined, multifaceted. You need multiple different hats, and I've written some stuff around that, so look it up on the blog. But you have so many different trades in procurement that you utilize every single day that I don't think that there is a better place to be. Now, we need to constantly articulate that and sell it. But so I wish that somebody at my earlier part in my career would have already kind of given me some of those insights, because then I may have gone into procurement sooner.
Great. No, that's great. Well, this has been a great discussion, Michael. I know you're a busy person, so we're running up there. So again, if people wanted to get in contact with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, just look me up on LinkedIn. I try to respond as much as I can. It's not the easiest way to communicate, but look me up on LinkedIn or send me an email, mvk@coupa.com. I'm always happy to engage. Again, we can't keep talking about elevating procurement unless we're also willing to put time and energy into that. So I'm always happy to have a conversation, always.
Great. Appreciate it. Well, thanks, Michael. Have a great week. Great holiday.
Thanks for having me. Happy holidays, man. Cheers.
Bye.